Unsee the future. Hello and welcome to Unsee the Future, the Hopeychattybits with me, Timo Peach, in which I meet artists, solarpunks and changemakers, reimagining the stories we think we're in. There are times, I think, in crisis in particular, where it feels like we can't change anything. We have to just hang on, survive and get through. And we can all think of people in different parts of the world, but especially perhaps in Ukraine, for some of us closer to there, who will be just doing that, fighting for every breath, fighting for every moment. But the call over you and me feeling helpless watching events like this, which is in effect nothing new, is to find our own agency and to question the stories we think we're in as other things try to emerge. And that's the purpose of my podcast, is to have conversations with people who are helping me explore what it means to change the story we think we're in and the narrative structure going on in our heads. My contention being that that's what's driving our behaviors everywhere. And they're not great behaviors, are they? So who have I got joining me in this fourth episode? I'm delighted to have today's guest. She is an award-winning filmmaker, research designer, writer and educator, as well as president of the International Bateson Institute based in Sweden. Her work asks the question, how can we improve our perception of the complexity we live within so we may improve our interaction with the world? And is that timely or not? An international lecturer, researcher and creative, she is the founder of Warm Data and the Warm Data Lab, bringing together a team of international thinkers, scientists and artists to innovate a form of inquiry, which Nora coined as transcontextual research. Based on the question, how can we create context in which to study the context? From her first book, Small Arcs of Larger Circles, she has developed a very personal approach to the study of systems and complexity to explore a process she observes as symathesy, how living entities evolve when interacting with each other in a shared context of learning. Her work brings the fields of biology, cognition, art, anthropology, psychology, and information tech together into a study of the patterns in ecology of living systems. She says great stories, great music, great art, great love, great ideas have tension, incongruity, paradox. This era of change, breakdown, breakthrough is going to require a form of play that allows for epistemological confusion as old ways of perception twist into new presuppositions. And she says, in the fissures where the sharp edges of our fragmentation have cut through the tissue of togetherness and left it to bleed, the patterns of our perception crave play. She is the intensely interesting and I think rather wonderful Nora Bateson. Nora, welcome to Unsee the Future, the Hopeychattybits. And that was a really cut down look at you and your work and involvement. There's a lot to talk about.
I loved it. It was so fun to watch you say all that.
Yes.
I have to live up to it now.
I know. I don't mean to put pressure on your shoulders, but you've been thinking and working for a long time into this issue. And we find ourselves in an era of crisis now that seems to make it even more relevant. In some ways, nothing's changed. In some ways, a lot has changed. Do you feel your context has changed since you started this work?
You know, what I feel is that what's happening is that people are beginning to see the complexity more. And thank goodness for that, because honestly, 15 years ago, I was pulling my hair out trying to say, listen, there's this interconnectedness and things are moving in systems. And even though systems theory came in the 50s and 60s, and prior to that, I mean, most indigenous cultures in the world have been using a process of perception that looked at the relationships, okay, that later the systems theorists made into an academic theory, and the cyberneticians came in. But for the last couple of 100 years, all of us who are in this world of industry have been trained to actually perceive the world as a kind of a machine. And
Yes.
that even our lives are like a factory, we're born, and then someone fills us up with knowledge, and then we do the thing, and then we get kind of packaged up, and we get a label, and we go into the world, and it's all very linear.
Yeah.
And the causality is linear, the language is linear, the whole dream is linear.
Yes. Well, I
And
wanted.
yeah,
No,
go
go
ahead.
on.
I was just going to say, suddenly, kind of in the middle of the pandemic in particular, it became really obvious that this idea of systemic problems and systemic process was real. That
Yeah.
COVID was economic, it was education, it was family, it was
Yeah.
politics, it was history, it was tech, it was all these things. It wasn't just the doctors.
No, exactly. And we're all getting much more used to words like intersectional and structural, as well as systemic. These are becoming everyday words for everyday people. Now, I was thinking of a great way to start the complexity of how you approach this. Your language is richly poetic and inspiring, but richness has to be sat with. And I was wondering where to start, because right now more than ever, it's a bit of an ask to ask people to invite chaos, trust complexity, and fund systems change. That sounds like a big academic ask, but I wanted to ask you, as a way in, to tell the lifeboat story.
Okay, so the Lifeboat Story is actually a story. It's an ethics exercise that often gets given to kids, or it's sometimes in organizations. There's a coaching exercise, and the idea is that you need to think through how you would make decisions in an emergency situation where you have limits. And so the idea is this: there's a lifeboat, and there's 50 empty seats in the lifeboat, but there's 100 drowning people in the water. And the question is, how are you going to choose who gets on the boat?
Right.
Right. And so then you have to try to figure out, well, what would be the criteria? Who's going to make the criteria? Most kids in that moment try immediately to change the rules, right? Because human beings we don't want to leave anybody in the water, right? So let's try to change the rules. But no, you can't do that. Don't change the rules.
You can't change the rules, Nora.
You can't change the rules of the game. You have to come up with your own criteria, and the criteria become very dark, actually. Immediately, it's just this kind of heartbreaking way to get a group of people's imaginations in motion, to be asking questions like, well, this person is a young person, so does that mean that they're more valuable to the future, or does that mean that since they don't have education and experience that they're less valuable? There's an old person, they have more experience, but they could get sick, they could be a cost to the society. Are they less valuable or more valuable? Here's a sick person. Is this person more valuable or less valuable? Or here's
I feel like we should be getting a whiteboard and doing some sort of, I don't know, point system. I wonder if anybody else has done a point system for how people are valued. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's horrifying. And I've always hated that exercise, because it gets up the questions all going in the wrong direction. And, honestly, we are in a moment where we are looking at all sorts of crises, from
Yeah.
economic, political, cultural, ecological, pandemic, etc. And so the need for people to come together and actually explore and imagine how they're going to get through things together, how they're going to find a way through together is so important. And so, the thing with the Lifeboat Story is that actually it's developed by this guy, Garrett Hardin. And he's the guy who wrote The Tragedy of the Commons. And, there's quite a bit of work that is in everyday ecological discourse that is touched by Hardin's seminal ideas and thinking, like natural resources, like population, like, right? And the thing about Hardin is he was a card-carrying eugenicist.
Yes.
Right? So eugenics, in that moment, in fact, the statisticians, all of them, I'm pretty sure it's all of them, in that moment were part of the eugenics movement.
It's the sort of zero-sum way of boiling down what a human being is. It'll be a unit of some kind or other.
Yeah, a unit that uses resources.
Mm.
And that can be measured. And, if you switch the story just the tiniest little bit, and suddenly you see that these are human beings in the water. They're not floating numbers. They're human beings. They have experience. They have life. They have dreams. They have language. They have, ancestors. They have all kinds of complexity in them, just like you do, and just like I do. And, when we started this conversation, whatever it was, 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, what we are discovering right now is what we bring out in each other. Who am I when I'm with you, Timo?
Yeah. I know it's sillier, possibly a little sillier.
And that's, it's not negating of who I am when I'm with anybody else. Yeah. But who I am with you is different. And what you and I can dream up together, what ideas, the way my ideas or language enters your imagination and heart. And it's fantastic. It's like this, there's this intimate realm of possibility that is not only intimate, but infinite.
This seems to me such a lovely way into your work, the idea that who I am with you is a different version of me than with other people. And that's like another fractal fragment of who I am, the kind of the crystal of who I am, reflecting a slightly different version of light. And if that's our starting point, maybe we can come up with whole different solutions to whether it's a problem having 50 people still in the water or not. But it also speaks about teamwork, doesn't it? That there's a magic to some mix of humans and a dark magic to another, where things just don't work, don't flow.
And that's the thing, is that I think there's, if we were on the boat or in the water, we would figure it out. We would find a way, nature finds a way. This is what is the most natural thing, is this kind of stochastic improvisation of figuring things out as paths unfold before us. We find new ways to respond.
Yes.
And so we would tie our clothes together. We would take turns swimming. We would find stuff that floats. There's what one group of people would come up with would be very different than another group.
Yes.
And so trying to come up with a methodology to solve the problem in itself is a negation of the potentiality that every group of people has. And so I think for me, in my work, one of the questions I'm really working on is, how do we nourish the flexibility we don't yet know we're going to need?
Oh, how can we nourish the flexibility we don't yet know we're going to need? These are all your turns of phrase, your idioms and references are very warm, poetic, human language. And you simply use the term warm data to describe this more qualitative approach than quantitative. So my question to you is, where do you think all this logic robot world stuff comes from in humans, that we all want to nail things down and get in boxes? How has it got to this extreme, do you think, the robot thinking?
I think that it's coming through all different contexts of our lives. We get it in school. We get taught that this is different than that. So the education system is, in these little step by step, the way we perceive ourselves as individuals, our whole way of exploring identity is actually as a kind of isolated node. And there's nothing isolated about you as a node, my friend. You are like, where's the
No.
end of you? And so the way, do I end at this skin, or do I extend into the ideas and the ancestry and language and my microbiome and my, who am I? How do I know where I stop and start and my culture stops and starts? Because there's no stop and start.
No.
And so this robot thing is being produced in all directions. And that's why it's so potent, because it's at the grocery store, it's in the finance, it's in the health system, it's at the school, it's in the way that we think about parenting, it's in the way that we talk about how to get successful, it's in the way we think about what personal development is. It's everywhere. And so when you get multiple impressions of a singular set of patterns, they start to reinforce each other. Yes. And we're getting this reinforced from every direction, to the point where, when I say we have to look at the relational process, the thing is not the thing. You are not you. You are a set of relationships that are, go wildly out in many directions. And that's very uncomfortable. Why is that uncomfortable?
I don't know. Why do you think it is?
There's some strange security in thinking that there is control. But the mysterious thing for me about that is, honestly, like, it seems pretty clear that this doesn't work. I mean, who among us has ever actually been in control of your marriage, of your kids, of your body, of your love life, of your appetites, really? We think that we're going to be in control if we just do this one more methodology?
Yeah.
So it works anyway.
I was thinking this morning, I'm in the middle of writing chapter 4 of my book, Think Like an Artist and Change the World. And I'm looking at the principle of how art practices bring things to life. They put blood and warmth and emotional connection into things, so they come alive. But I was looking at Edward Hopper's, dead famous images, but especially the Nighthawks from 1942, that beautiful sort of modernist captured moment. And although it's definitely a seductive image of the people in the diner, 2 a.m, whatever it is, they seem isolated, and there is a sort of promise of something else coming. It still doesn't half look like inner landscapes in him, but in America, that was sort of felt the burden of individualism and lostness, before America had even reached its height in the 50s. That is a burden, isn't it? Trying to actualize yourself all alone as an individual node.
It's not happening anyway. I mean, even in the Lifeboat Story, right? We're talking about each person having this fantastic, unique collection of experiences and ways of responding to the world. And yet there's so much that we have shared.
Yeah.
And that come from context, that come from our culture, that come from language, that come from shared versions of history. May not be the right version, because there's a lot of different versions, but we sometimes share a version.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the dreams, and when you share an illusion, That's so much more potent than sharing something that is real, whatever real is. Because
Yes.
because it can continue to move and shift and shape.
It,
And yeah, so that dream of the agency of the individual is full of paradoxes, actually.
yes, it is. But you're making me think. I mean, all this principle is simply bringing to mind the principle of fractals, the
Mm.
Mandelbrot set, and the idea that who wrote the book in the 30s, first looking at the idea of fractalization. The book was entitled "How Long is the Coastline of the United Kingdom?"
It was
I can't
yeah.
remember.
Anyway, go ahead.
But the point there is that the simplest question of, right, well, how long is the coastline of a country? Oh, well, it's accepted as this long. Is it? How close in are you? Are you measuring every pebble? Because the more you measure at a smaller thing, the longer that number gets, and that's very immediately mind-boggling. But also, I think that's a burden, isn't it? That we want simpler stories to be able to get out of bed and not feel overwhelmed.
I think that we're going to have to rethink overwhelm.
Ooh.
Because honestly, we are overwhelmed. And
Mm.
and there's nothing more overwhelming than a whole lot of consequences from having misunderstood the actual rhythm and patterns of life and been creating a lot of incongruity that is disrupting everything.
Yeah,
That is exhausting.
it is.
Where if you can begin to perceive the way that relationships are moving and perceive that in it, and then you can respond to it in ways that cause far less destructive consequences.
Mm.
So
It's
that's
keep.
actually it's much less exhausting.
I'm interested how we move into that practice. That the idea of holding our stories much more lightly, much more consciously as an illusion, like a helpful illusion. Like this is a construct. It's a kind of play that we're all playing, but we know it's a play, and the play can change. How do you imagine us being able to reapproach this play and work into the practice daily that you're talking about to free us of that burden? How do we start as individuals?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to start. Art is really important, okay, because art
That's
pushes.
bang on brand. Thanks, Nora.
No problem. Um, but because it pushes the way that you're perceiving, it pushes the edges of your understanding. And that's really important because it makes you think about how you were thinking. It makes you perceive about how you're
Mm,
perceiving. And so the second we start to do that, you get a little bit of leverage in your matrix. You start to see, aha, there is a matrix. Now you haven't gotten yourself out of it, but you have actually seen it. And so you have a little
mm,
more possibility to move
mm.
differently in it. The other thing that I would say is really important is cultural confusion. Spending time with people who are from another culture than your own,
Right.
and finding those places where you get confused, where you don't understand, where you thought it was one thing and it turned out to be another. Because the trickiest bit is that when these patterns and habits of perceiving, they get so familiar that we start to think that they're real, and we
Yes.
can't imagine that actually they might just be one possible narrative, one possible explanation, one possible expression. I mean, why do we have to measure everything?
Mm.
What about start to ask the question, does this require measurement or does it not?
Well, that's just a crazy question, Nora. And obviously, you're completely losing your mind now. Why do we have to measure everything? Yeah, why do we have to? Do we have to measure this, or should we listen to this?
Yeah. And the measurements are not telling us things. In fact, what they're doing is giving us information, which is so decontextualized. Okay. So in order to actually capture a measurement of a living system, you have to pull it out of its context. Right.
Yes.
If you want to measure the child's development, you have to take it out of its family, out of his play world, out of his language, out of everything that is producing the way that he's being in the world, or she.
Yes.
And then you can start to measure how they do on a test. But that test is totally, completely decontextualized. And
yes.
so
Hello, the entire global education system.
Yeah. And so the complexity of the child, the multiple contexts in which that child is learning to be in their world. There are many children who learn to hold back because they need to.
Yes.
For survival, for culture, to show respect, in all kinds of ways. And then we say, they really aren't very developed in their ability to express themselves. And that's just not right.
Yeah.
But
they might just be observing the whole time, going, I'm not opening my mouth yet, mate. I'm just taking in what lunacy's going on. But yes, they might look less responsive.
Right. Or kids who learn not to be very affectionate.
Yeah.
And then we say, well, there's something, they're very aloof. There's something wrong with them. They haven't emotionally developed. Well, really? Maybe they have. Maybe they have developed a sensitivity to when it's appropriate to be affectionate that goes beyond or follows a different set of patterns than the ones you're accustomed to. And so that's the kind of thing that's happening in all directions.
In all directions, I know. How do you carry that from childhood, if I might ask a more personal question? How did you find growing up in the system as it was? Your father, of course, is the name behind the Bateson Institute. Was he a very academic person? Was he a very warm person? You've clearly followed in his footsteps, so he must have inspired. But how did you form these warm data sets of your own growing up?
I mean, the answer to all of that is yes. He was very academic. Yes, he was very warm. Yes, he was, interested in being able to perceive and respond to lots of different situations.
Right.
So he worked in information technology and psychology. He worked in anthropology. He did lots of different things. And this is where the warmth comes in, because if you read my dad's work and you can find your way through the intellectual language, what you will find underneath it is an incredible affection for life. And that for me is where the warmth is. So
Wonderful.
That, rage, fight, be confused, have sorrow, do whatever we need to do, write whatever metaphors, be in whatever art form, but do it with affection for life. And that is where what I'm hoping for, and the Lifeboat Story is that, right? It's like with affection for life, you come into that story and you say, let's find a way. Let's figure this out. And it changes the direction.
It changes the direction you're facing. Exactly. I think my own feeling, you're striking right to the heart of the way I'm seeing this at the moment, which is our call is to champion life. And that's immaterial what the source of life is. Actually, the backstory to life, in a sense, doesn't matter. We can all get around this, whether we are whatever our belief system, our backstory.
Mhm.
It's the fact that we represent the lunacy of not of life at all in the universe, but life that can write bad songs in the bedroom and pull
Totally.
out of itself and go, why am I feeling this? This is incredible. And that's what our bad habits and our inadequate stories are extinguishing. We should be champions of the very existence of life, right? In you and me individually. It's your gift, my gift.
And there's a kind of affection. I want to go back to that word affection.
It's a lovely word.
Because there's this great piece that I pulled out of my dad's work recently and posted all over the place, where there's a dialogue between father and daughter, and it's getting all very like, what's the, it's all impossible. How do you deal with systemic problems, right? Because the problem is everywhere, and how do you get rid of it, right? This machine metaphor is everywhere. How do we get rid of it? And if we can't get rid of it by changing the parts, how do we know what to do? And and the child is getting frustrated. And finally she asks, what's the point? If you can't make it change, what's the point? To which the father replies, if you had ever been in love, you wouldn't ask that question.
Yes.
And there it is, right? So I, having grown up in California, grow very weary of a lot of kind of saccharine surface, kind of lightweight positivity. It kind of bugs me, actually, because it doesn't really have affection for life. Affection for life means that you're ready to get down knee deep in the mud, that you're willing to deal with the blood, the sweat, the tears, that you're willing to stay up all night in the vomit and still have affection for life. And so I don't readily start throwing love around as something, because people often trivialize that. But this notion of seeing life through our own experience of love, seeing life, a meadow, an ocean, a society, your family, life.
Yes.
Through your own experience of love. And the reason that resonates for me is that it's filled with irrationality. It's filled with things that are moving in ways you don't know, you don't understand. The pathways that open up are going places you haven't been able to predict or name or discover. And that is essentially what evolution is doing.
Yes. But
right?
it's doing it in our consciousness. We don't just reflect evolutionary processes in our bodies. We reflect it in our imaginations, the need for diversity and the way we resist it. Or yes, this whole process you're discussing. So how do we tackle the fear of being okay with the unknown, of surfing all known unknowns and unknown unknowns?
I just got to tell you that I got to switch that question around and reverse it and say, okay, so what actually is safe? Name one thing that's safe. Because staying on the course that we're in, boxed into our little ideas of our, node-like identities, marching through the world trying to collect material points, this is clearly not safe. Clearly not safe. So so what's safe? And so for me, go back to the Lifeboat Story. What's safe? The only thing that I really see that brings something that could be some sort of distant relative to safety is nourishing that possibility of being able to perceive each other's and our own complexity and responding to that. That is much safer.
You're making me
we got 8 billion people. Tick tock, the time's ticking. How do we do that?
Yes. You're making me think two things there. One is a long cherished belief by me that love is a verb. It's a doing word.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also been coming to the idea lately that, in a way, oneness, when you boil down subatomic physics and boil down just the common sense of looking at systems on Earth, everything is one, man. And that may as well be the word love as well. But the other thing you're making me think is an artistic principle of embodiment, that the fear is lost in moving out into it. That's where you learn. That's where you flow around the uncertainty. That's where you strengthen your muscles. That's where the fear is in the unknown, perhaps, in the disconnection.
I mean, I'm not really that afraid of fear. I think that fear can also be an affection for life. So, you know, I think it's okay. I learn a lot from my fear.
Yes.
I just don't park myself in it indefinitely.
Mm.
And I think one of the things for me is that, I made this film about my dad.
Yes,
And
you did.
it was a really interesting experience because when you make film about somebody, you have a linear form of expression.
Yeah, a story.
In which to describe a complex system, i.e. a human being.
Mm.
And I really felt the weight of this because even though my father died when I was young, I didn't want to make a movie that killed him. I didn't want to sum him up, package him up, and have that be that.
Ooh.
Right? I wanted to find a way to describe him that allowed my relationship with him and his ideas to keep growing, and your relationship and whoever else was viewing the film to be in this open-ended process that a poem allows you into, where prose shuts you out.
Mm.
Right? I didn't want to say Gregory Bateson was ... period.
Yes.
Right?
Period.
Because that would kill him.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do was to open up a possibility that he could live on in our ideas and in our way of thinking. So, and that was his whole work too, was this question of how do you describe a living being? How do you describe
and not kill it by describing it, much like principles of particle physics as well. The idea, if you look at it, you've changed it.
Right.
If you write down someone's life, you've killed them. That's a big storytelling challenge, isn't it? Now, I think am I right in saying that he said this quote: interesting phenomena occur when two or more rhythmic patterns are combined. And these phenomena illustrate very aptly the enrichment of information that occurs when one description is combined with another.
Mm-hmm.
But I find the fact that starting point ends up with the words affection for life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have a phrase that one of your more recent papers, afani poiesis. This is a really interesting kind of development from what you've done since your first book, moving towards publishing a book on warm data.
Mm-hmm.
An unseen coalescence towards vitality. Oh, it's another delicious phrase of yours. An unseen coalescence towards vitality. How are you exploring this word?
Oh, I love this. This is so much fun. And there's hope here. There's real hope here, because sometimes working with complexity and systems, it all seems like it's all so entangled and interwoven that there's no way to make anything change. Afani poiesis, the word is made of two Greek roots, afani meaning unseen, and poiesis, becoming. So we see the word afani in words like diaphanous,
Yes,
or fantasy, or phantom. And poiesis you see in poetry, you see in autopoiesis, a term that's well known in the systems world by Varela and Maturana. I just, after a couple of years, it's actually been 10 years now that I've been working with warm data.
Yeah.
And what has happened is that I have started to just have to stop apologizing and say, you know, most of the things that are happening around us have been brewing for a long time in ways we weren't paying attention to. And
Yes.
so we are, you know, a little bit over fascinated with emergence when things are actually, it's happening. But in order for that happening to happen, it has to have actually submerged and been in a process of unseen coalescence. And then after some time, you start to get this emergence. And so, you know, this is really easy to point to in very negative ways. Okay. So the word insidious comes to mind as looking at, you know, the way gradual processes over time become really harmful. Addiction, corruption, racism, sexual harassment, you know, gender, all sorts of issues of our world are rooted consumerism, greed.
And again, you embody them, you practice them up, and they harden and they calcify and they become immovable seeming because you keep doing them.
And because things are, you know, we were talking earlier about the way how in transcontextual process, you get this pattern in school, and then you see it in the health system, and then you see it in the legal system, and you see it in the economic system. And these things are coalescing in ways that we aren't really sure how. And suddenly we're like, how come we keep thinking like robots?
Yes.
Right. And there it is. You know, one example that I would say in another direction is that you can't make somebody love you. Whatever it is that's coalescing is beyond your reach. You can't tell somebody you have to respect that person. It doesn't work. You can't tell people to just be at peace because there have been these coalescings over time. And you don't know it. You don't know what brought you to this moment. You know, like sometimes you might hear a song that you haven't heard in many years. And when you hear it totally differently because your life has been coalescing, and suddenly something you never heard before, you can hear. You're ready to hear it in a new way.
Ready to hear it.
You're ready to hear it. Where does that readiness come from? Well, another way to play with this is to ask the question, you know, again about evolution. How does an organism know how to evolve?
Yeah.
I mean, think about that, right? So we have all these habituated, familiar ways of talking, of being in relationship, of, you know, an earthworm has all these habituated, structural, informed ways of being. How does it change that? It doesn't know how to be other than it is. All of its familiar processes, and yet it happens. So there is a kind of a storage, an underground, an underwater place, an unshaped world where these coalescing experiences are meeting each other, changing each other, and becoming. So for me, this is the big question of not necessarily what to do about all the popcorn problems that are popping up right, left, and center, but to pay attention to what are we allowing to go into that Afani poetic world. What's submerging in us? Not so we can see it, because I don't think it's a good idea to try to see it. I think it's a good idea to leave the unseen, but to let it be wild and to nourish it so that you have possibilities, right? Flexibility that you don't know you're going to need yet. And
You are, I mean, you're describing it in very, very obviously there, simply the processes of evolution. This idea that for umpteen million years, nothing on Earth seemed to change. And then all of a sudden, apparently out of nowhere, one day a switch is flicked and something emerges, something erupts. That seems to make no sense to us, but you're describing that exact process happening everywhere all the time culturally. Once again, we are in consciousness embodying evolutionary processes, inextricably a part of life. But I'm interested in the question, we're given the extra layer of what seems like an extra layer of actual consciousness, where we can write those bad poems and try and think about it. This is a dumb question, but it's also the daily one. Where's the line? How do we draw the line between agency and acceptance?
I mean, okay, you asked for it. This agency thing is an issue. It is an issue. And it's an issue because it is actually not so easy to figure out what agency is. And it's a word we throw around all too readily. And, you know, are you doing something from you, or are you enacting the patterns of your culture and your context? And how would you know the difference?
Yeah.
So it's a problem. And that problem is wonderful. Okay? That problem is filled with tension that makes you pay attention.
Yeah.
If I'm asking myself, am I doing this because it's part of my culture, or does this really come from me? And, you know, even when we talk about imagination, right? We have to ask ourselves, where did these ideas come from?
Yeah. What are the frames of reference? What are the structures that we put together in our minds?
What is the soil in which this sprout came from? This seed sprouted. And so we have the danger of actually having our own imaginations continue to sprout ideas that go back into the mechanistic metaphor, because that's the soil we're brewing them in. That's the way our language expresses.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is not be a downer here, but actually to say the exciting thing is to pay attention to it and to start asking yourself, is this language that I'm using? Is this word bringing with it ideas that I really want to bring into this? And that's why sometimes I feel like I need to make up new words, because I don't want to bring the other words with me. And so I think what I would like to think about is, you know, when you are in a situation, you're in the kitchen with your kids and your kids aren't doing the dishes and you're the parent. Okay? I'm speaking from my own experience.
Yes.
I'm in the kitchen and I'm the parent. Okay? Let's rephrase that. And I feel like there's all this cultural weight on me that says, as a good parent, I need to teach my children to do the dishes because they need to pull their weight and but they're not doing the dishes. They're on their phones. They're totally atomizing into their little individual nodes because they're also learning to be individual nodes and that they should have an identity that's a particular individual node. And here we are in our kitchen, and we're all dealing with all these cultural swarms of scripts, and they're just tangling us all up. And
right there in the kitchen, right there by the pile of dirty dishes. That's what's going on in and around and through you.
Right. That's what's happening. Every one of us. And so it's that moment of just taking that quick step back and taking a look. There it is. Here we all are dealing with all these cultural scripts and teleprompters and ideas of what's good, what's bad, what we should, what we shouldn't, how to be successful, how to get out of it, how to be manipulative, how to be clever, how to be loved, right? And it's all in there. And somehow we also have to get the dishes done.
Yeah.
And so then I'm faced with this moment of like, how is my contribution into this scene I'm putting something into an ecology of communication. What am I going to put in there that allows it to grow in another way? What am I going What's in the tone of my voice? What's in the choice of my words? What's in the gesture of my being? What's in the resonance of my emotions as I say something to my kids that says,
what is the logos that you are bringing?
yeah, what potion are you dripping into the soup?
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And there's
And
long been a romance, I think, that is a reassuring, often in science fiction, of coming back to the idiosyncrasies of humans and the domestic silliness of ordinary people. It's there in Tolkien. The hobbits are the most, domestic, silly, provincial creatures. And when at the end the king of the whole realm says, "You kneel to no man," crikey, gets me there. That is a romantic view, but it reminds us of being grounded with those big hairy feet, doesn't it? To be grounded to the soil, in our heads in the clouds, trying to work out the complexity, yet our feet must be grounded in the soil. Is there something in that when you're feeding the chickens, when you're despairing at the kids not doing the washing up? Is that how you cope with the two? Is it just remembering I'm connected to both those scales?
And I think for me, I'm also that for me, that moment is an invitation to be in affection of life. Here we all are. And what are we going to do together? How are we going to figure this out? Because I don't want my kids to grow up feeling humiliated by me because I told them that they didn't do the dishes when they should, and they don't help the way they ought to, and they're so selfish, and then there's 1,000 scripts, thousands of them about
Yes.
not doing the dishes. So how do I break from that in a way that is also not a methodology? I'm not going to drop a methodology here. If you're wondering how to get your kids to do the dishes, I'm just going to say this: pay attention to the complexity and play in it, be in it, love in it. If you're afraid, be afraid in it. If you're angry, be angry in it, but be in it. And that's where whatever the response is, it's going to come. And your kids are paying attention. So I have this great story about my son, and I asked him to take out the trash. He was about 12. This is so on point. And I was like, Trevor, it'd be nice if you took out the trash sometime. The things that you find coming out of your mouth.
They just come out, yes.
Oh, it's dreadful. And Trevor looks at me, all right, and he smiles and he goes, "All right, Mom, I'll be happy to take out the trash, but can you give me like a half an hour to forget it with your idea?"
Your kid is smart. Did you just give him a round of applause?
You see, they're watching. And that was like fantastic because he nailed me. And he's like, can you find a better invitation for us to figure out how to live together than to be a nagging such and such? Because, I love you and I'm going to take out the trash, but I'm going to forget you came at me with that tone first. And I have such respect for that.
He's already got it. You go, all right, no, you've just grown up as much as I can reasonably expect anyone to. Well done, you've arrived. How does it feel?
And
Nora, go on.
Yeah, because it's about the relationship. It's not about the dishes. Okay, so just to bring it all back, it's about looking at the complexity of relationships. And complexity is such a word, right? Really, let's just call it life. And looking at life, making lifing, and knowing we're part of it, and trying not to damage each other.
I would say I want to keep talking for the next hour. I had this problem on the show because we're having such a lovely time, but I feel there's so much to digest there for our lovely viewer listener. My last question to you is one that I like to ask my guests before we go, and that is, what ancestral artifact would you like to leave forward for people yet to come? A notion or a symbolic item itself? What would you like to leave forward for others from your time here?
Yeah, I think it's more of a vibe.
I like a vibe.
Yeah, I think it's something in the in between. It's not really anything I said. It's not really anything I did. It's nothing I owned. It's nothing I made. But something between all of those that has a kind of resonance that makes room for people to explore new pathways and find new ways of finding ways. And doing that with affection for life. Whatever that is, a vibe.
That's perfect. Nora Bateson, it's been an utter delight, and I hope we can talk again very, very soon. Bless you. Thanks for being on Unsee the Future.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Unsee the Future. Were you taking notes? I shall put notes, as I always try to do, in the full page of this over at unseethefuture.com. A huge thank you to Nora Bateson for taking time out of the complexity of ordinary life, feeding chickens, feeding the family, and dealing with such big issues in all our many layers of reality at the moment that we're all sharing. You can find out more about Nora at the Bateson Institute. I'll put all the links below as well. And I really thank you for spending time with this. You can find out more about me at unseethefuture.com, Timo Peach. I would say that the current single from Momo, Tempo, How Big, is out. Go get it. It resonates weirdly with everything that's happening at the moment. And in these times of conflict, I'm hoping you're finding the beginnings of some practices and tools to reframe the story you think we're in. Because this is how we do it. We do it together, and we live into each moment, each relational moment, listening in and responding to the listening, having the courage to not try and figure it all out in one dump, like learning how to fly a Huey, downloading it, and now I know Kung Fu. It's not like that. You are weaving a thread, as Rena said last week. So thank you for weaving your thread around this and for sharing it wherever you can. Unseethefuture.com, you'll find all the back episodes of the Hopeychattybits. There you will also find my book, How to Think Like an Artist and Change the World, which I'm publishing each week at the moment with this first series of the Hopeychattybits. Go and find it, see what you make about all those 9 practices of artists that I think can help all of us, whatever we label ourselves, however creative you think you are, find the courage to be involved with less fear in the times we find ourselves in, though they appear fearsome and unknowable. You, sausage, have a part in it as much as I do. Thank you, and I'll see you next time on the Hopeychattybits.
How big do you want to be? We'll rule the galaxy. How much you want to get? How much you want